Good day, mates! J-Bone here, and it is time to preview and predict this weekend's Formula 1 Australian Grand Prix that I assume will be taking place upside down because I do not understand how globes work. J-Bone! The 2024 F1 Australian Grand Prix takes place in Melbourne, Australia at the Albert Park Circuit on Sunday, March 24th at 3 p.m. local time. Interestingly, because of how time zones work, the 2024 Australian Grand Prix will actually be the third F1 Grand Prix in a row to take place entirely on a Saturday instead of a Sunday for those who live between the Pacific time zone and the international dateline. The more you know. I'm surprised I understand that fact because I have no idea how globes work, and let that useless fact serve as a reminder for you to look up when the Australian Grand Prix events are local time, as you're probably going to need to plan your entire weekend around the Australian Grand Prix calendar of events if you want to watch qualifying and the Grand Prix live. Here are some interesting Australian Grand Prix history facts for you. While the Australian Grand Prix currently takes place at the Albert Park Circuit in Melbourne, that hasn't always been the case. From when the Australian Grand Prix first became part of the F1 calendar in 1985 through 1995, it was held over 700 kilometers away in Adelaide on the Adelaide Street Circuit. Melbourne effectively stole the race from Adelaide by way of money and politics, which, if you know F1, is the least surprising thing ever. The 1995 Australian Grand Prix, which was the final one held in Adelaide, still holds the record for the most attended F1 race weekend of all time at 520,000 people, though that does include a Thursday that somehow attracted 74,000 race fans bidding farewell to their city's Grand Prix. Interestingly, the 1995 Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide was the final race of the 1995 F1 season, and the 1996 Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne was the opening race of the 1996 F1 season, making the 1995 and 1996 Australian Grand Prix the only time races with the same title were run consecutively in the history of Formula 1. Since the move from Adelaide to Melbourne in 1996, the Australian Grand Prix historically has served as Formula 1's season opening race, with Melbourne hosting the first round of every F1 season, minus 2 from 1996 through 2019. The Australian Grand Prix was scheduled to be the first round of the 2020 season. However, the 2020 Australian Grand Prix race weekend was famously cancelled right before FP1 in response to growing pandemic fears. In what will mark a return to the norm after 5 years, the Australian Grand Prix will go back to being the season opener of Formula 1 starting next season in 2025. Here's some F1 trivia for you. The Formula 1 Australian Grand Prix Albert Park Circuit is different from every other current F1 circuit in one huge way. Do you know what that is? And no, the answer is not, it's in Australia, which is technically correct, but if you guessed that, you're a jerk. The real answer is that the Albert Park Circuit has 4, count them, 4 DRS activation zones, whereas no other circuit has more than 3. If you're new to Formula 1, a DRS, or drag reduction system activation zone, is an area of an F1 circuit where if you were within 1 second of the car ahead at the DRS activation zone's accompanying DRS detection line, you can activate your car's drag reduction system for the entirety of that zone. DRS opens up your car's rear wing, thus reducing drag and increasing top speed to assist you in overtaking the car ahead, with the stated goal of combating dirty air and creating closer racing. Interestingly, despite having the most DRS activation zones in Formula 1, the Albert Park Circuit does not have the most DRS detection lines in Formula 1, as its 4 DRS activation zones share just 2 detection lines. This is opposed to a circuit like the Red Bull Ring, where each of its 3 DRS activation zones has its own detection line. Albert Park's 4 DRS activation zones play a large role in car setup for the Australian Grand Prix, as teams will have to account for their cars' rear wings being open much more than at other circuits if their cars are involved in close racing. So be on the lookout for open wings all race weekend long. You'll see a lot of them in Australia. Next up, in honor of this weekend's 2024 Australian Grand Prix, let's talk about how the worst penalty in the history of Formula 1 was given to Carlos Sainz at last year's 2023 Australian Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz started the race P5, dropped down to P11 after his first pit stop, and then made his way back through the field to where he was P4 on the grid when a red flag was waved late in the race. This meant Sainz would be restarting the race in P4 with just 2 laps remaining. On the first lap of this restart, Sainz collided with Fernando Alonso, and while both of them remained in the race, a red flag was waved because of 2 other separate crashes. None of the drivers involved in those crashes got penalties, as their incidents were deemed to be first lap racing incidents, but the stewards were not so kind to Carlos Sainz, to say the least. They gave Sainz a penalty because they deemed him wholly to blame for the incident, and while Sainz probably did deserve a penalty of some sort, the penalty they gave him was the worst penalty in F1 history. Sainz was handed a 5-second time penalty, which doesn't sound that bad, as it's the penalty a driver would normally get for what he did. However, this was not a normal situation, as the race was about to end behind a safety car because there were now too few laps remaining to continue racing. When cars are behind a safety car, they're allowed to bunch up all together, so the time gap between them is essentially completely eliminated, making a time penalty an absolutely insane penalty to give Carlos Sainz here. Sainz finished the race P4 behind the safety car, but because the cars were all bunched together, this 5-second time penalty dropped Carlos Sainz from P4 out of the points down to P12, which was literally last place of all race finishers. And get a load of this. The gap between P4 and P12 at the 2023 Bahrain Grand Prix was 50 seconds, and at the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was 45 seconds. So Sainz's 5-second penalty was more like 9 or 10 5-second penalties, which is so unbelievably unfair that it's not even funny. To make matters even worse, Fernando Alonso, who Sainz got the penalty for hitting, didn't even have his race impacted, as he still finished the race P3. So Sainz was effectively disqualified from the race for an action that had no negative consequence, which is why I deem his penalty the worst in F1 history. Now let's go from talking about the worst to the best, as I give a shout out to my longtime sponsor, Indeed, which is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one convenient place. Whether you're hiring or looking for a job, Indeed is the place to go. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed is a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. It's truly a one-stop shop for hiring. Something I love about Indeed, and the reason I use it to hire, is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy, because Indeed's hiring platform matches you with quality candidates instantly. Indeed is truly an unbelievably powerful hiring platform, and it's the #1 source of hires in the US according to Talent Nest. So what are you waiting for? Whether you're hiring for a job or searching for one, you need Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/FBone. Offer good for a limited time. Just go to Indeed.com/FBone and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/FBone. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Next up, here are the 3 F1 storylines you should be following throughout this weekend's 2024 Australian Grand Prix. First, it's home Grand Prix time for Australian fan-favorite F1 drivers Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie! Oi, oi, oi! You'll be able to hear the true blue Aussies from Sydney to Perth all race weekend long as they cheer on 2 home F1 drivers for the first time since 2013, when both Daniel Ricciardo and Mark Webber were on the grid. While Oscar Piastri will be looking to continue his streak of finishing every race this season in the points, as well as make it back-to-back home race points finishes to kick off his F1 career, Daniel Ricciardo, on the other hand, is under a lot more pressure. He's yet to qualify for or finish a race ahead of his VCARB teammate Yuki Tsunoda yet this season, if you don't include team orders calls, which I don't. And if Daniel doesn't turn things around here soon, he may not be long for Formula One. Red Bull and VCARB reserve driver Liam Lawson has made it very clear that he is waiting in the wings to take that VCARB seat from Danny Rick. He was recently asked if he is ready to replace Ricciardo, and Lawson responded, absolutely, while hinting that Ricciardo needs to step it up if he doesn't want his seat to be in danger. Danny Rick will have no more support this entire season than at his home race this weekend, and there would not be a better place nor time for him to finally start making ground on his teammate if he wants to stay in F1 past this season. So good luck, Danny Rick. All of Australia and I are cheering for you. Second, Ferrari F1 driver Carlos Sainz is in trouble. After kicking off this F1 season with a podium, Sainz followed that performance up by having his appendix burst before the next race, which was not ideal for him, but worked out well for Ferrari reserve driver Ollie Bearman, who finished P7 in Saudi Arabia on debut and took the spotlight away from Sainz at a time when Sainz really needs the spotlight. You see, Lewis Hamilton is replacing Sainz at Ferrari after this season, and Sainz does not yet have a spot on the 2025 F1 grid, which means he needs nothing more than to, 1, be well enough after his surgery for things to be back to normal for him in Melbourne this weekend, And 2, to put in a solid drive and get everyone talking about him again and not Ollie Behrman, who I must note is also looking for a drive for next season in Formula 1, just like Sainz is. It's crazy to think that Carlos Sainz, who was the only non-Red Bull driver to win a race last season, might not be on the F1 grid next season, but I don't ever put anything past the chaos-loving F1 gods. I think he will have a seat, but he doesn't yet, so who knows. And 3rd, what the heck is going on with Mercedes' F1 team right now? Before this season, Mercedes had us believing they were back to their old ways and were going to be fighting for race wins in 2024. Cut to the present, and they are fighting tooth and nail just for top 5 results. One huge issue facing Mercedes is that their car, the W15, looks absolutely dreadful in high-speed corners. This is something that is easily visualized when you see how the McLaren MCL38 of Oscar Piastri thoroughly pulled away from Lewis Hamilton's W15 in the high-speed first sector of the Jeddah Corniche circuit during the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. All hope is not lost, as Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff recently said the team is optimistic and hopes to make some initial progress for Melbourne with the learnings they gain there, guiding the car's future development. But if you're a Mercedes fan, that is all some stuff you heard for a while now, ever since Mercedes first botched this current regulations era with the W13, so I can understand if you're pessimistic, like I am. Only time will tell just how much ground Mercedes have made up and how optimistic they and their fans should be, so definitely keep an eye on the Mercedes cars all race weekend long to see if they're making up any ground. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, here are my 3 bona fide race predictions for this weekend's Formula 1 Australian Grand Prix. My first race prediction is that Red Bull will not have their drivers finish the race in first and second place for the first time this season. Australian Grand Prix can get quite chaotic. Look no further than last year's race, which only 12 of the 20 drivers finished, and I think some funky business will go down this year that will end Red Bull's run of back-to-back 1-2 finishes to kick off 2024. Additionally, the Australian Grand Prix hasn't been one that Red Bull generally dominate, as they have never had a double podium finish in Melbourne. My second race prediction is that Lando Norris will finish in the top 5 for the first time this season in Melbourne. Lando finished P6 in Australia last season and P5 the season before, both of those results being put up in cars that were way worse relative to the field than the one Lando is currently in. I honestly would not be surprised if Lando or Oscar backdoored a podium in Melbourne, just given how well McLaren have done there in recent years in worse cars. And my third race prediction is that Daniel Ricciardo will finish the race ahead of Yuki Tsunoda for the first time this season. Okay, Daniel technically finished ahead of Yuki in Bahrain, but that was only because of a team orders call that gave Daniel Yuki's position, so I don't count it. I think on home soil and with some more of his rust shaken off, Daniel Ricciardo beats Yuki fair and square in Melbourne. And finally today, here's my prediction for the 2024 Australian Grand Prix's top 5 finishers with zero reasoning nor explanation. P5, Lando Norris. P4, Carlos Sainz. P3, Checo. P2, Charles Leclerc. And P1, Max Verstappen. Leave a comment with your 2024 Australian Grand Prix race prediction so I can see them. But before you comment, remember to subscribe and then help me out by liking this video. I'm trying to get 1,500 likes on this video. Help me out. Let's do it. Come on. And by the way, if you're in the market for some gear to wear while you watch F1 this season, look no further than the Formula Bone merch shop. I have a ton of F1 inspired designs there that come in a ton of sizes and colors, so you're sure to find something you'll love. A link to the Formula Bone merch shop is in the description. Check it out if you want to support Formula Bone and yourself at the same time. Special shout out to my top YouTube channel members: Joe Max's #1 hater Snow, Snapple Facts, Brian Linton, Daddy Fett, Wolf Loves Racing, and David Hake. Mash that join button just below this video to get your name shouted out right here in future videos, as well as a bunch of other awesome perks for less than $5 a month. Until next time, folks, J-Bone! J-Bone!